Sanhedrin Council is what condemned Jesus to death. It is the highest court in the Jewish land. Once you get to the Sanhedrin, that's it. That's it. Whatever the decision is made, that's it. But in other words, it's the Supreme Court. He says when you call somebody rocker, you're in danger of having your trial moved from regular court, amen, to Supreme Court. And then he goes on, watch what he says after that. He says, and if you curse someone, what does anybody else's translation have for that word curse there? He calls them a fool. Now I know for many years, I was taught, you never supposed to say call somebody a fool, and you're not, amen. But this word, we said this morning, is a word, Murderous. It means numbskull. It means dumb. That's where moron comes from, exactly. I told a story this morning about the wife who was pregnant. Y'all remember that story?
Yes.
She went to the hospital after she had a car accident. She was knocked unconscious. And she was unconscious for a few months. And then she gave birth. They induced birth while she was in the coma. She had twins. One boy, one girl. And when she woke up, the doctor said, congratulations, you've got two beautiful children. She said, really? I don't remember any of that. He said, yes, we had a successful delivery. He says, and thankfully your brother, who's here, helped name him. That's when she got scared. She was like, oh my goodness, not my brother. My brother is an idiot. My brother couldn't tie his shoes right. My brother is he's a moron. She said, well, be that as it may, he named your children. He said, oh Lord, I'm just scared to even ask. What did he name my daughter? And after the doctor told her, she said, your daughter's name is Denise. And she got excited. She said, oh, he's not that, dumb after all. She was excited because the name was reasonable, Denise. He said, but what did she name my son? He said, well, of course, he called her the nephew. Because he was their uncle, so they called him Denise. But he just reinforced the fact that she thought he was a moron. But the point is, we should not call anyone that. That's what the Lord says. The Lord says, don't take it to the level where you despise somebody. And it's really more about contempt. That's really what it is. Yes.
Yeah, and what really stuck with me this morning is that we are made in the image of God. So it's like calling him that name.
Absolutely. You're looking at, when you turn and look at the person on your left, whether they be black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whether they be straight, gay, whether they be disabled or fully functional, you're looking at what God made. And if we keep that in mind, now, trust me, they might be being used by the devil, but that's God's creation. So you don't want to call God's creation something God didn't call it. Now, they make that. Now, here's the almost the contradiction to that. Here's the antithesis to that. The Lord calls some people dogs. In Scripture, he calls some people some names. He calls them some serpents, but the Lord can do that, I guess. Amen. And the Lord said, once you create man, you can call it what you want to call it too. Amen. But I just thought that was kind of ironic. Amen. All right, let's move on. He says, you are in danger of hellfire. This word is interesting. It's the word Gehenna. Gehenna, you'll find, I believe, in 1 Kings. Gehenna was a place outside the city limits of Jerusalem. It was a place years ago that they had what's called child sacrifice. There was an image that was created by the pagan nations by the name of Moloch. And I'm going to tell you why this is so interesting, because it has roots to Christmas. In the book of Genesis, I believe, around chapters, I have to go back.
Yes, that's it.
The Bible says Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That phrase there means he was against God. Nimrod, reportedly through tradition, married a woman by the name of Semiramis. She was Nimrod's mother. He married his own mother, according to the legend, basically. And so, Nimrod, the Bible says, in some translations, again, will say that he was against God. He was upset with God because God had killed his grandfather and his family during the flood. Remember, this is the reestablishment after Noah. The earth is being repopulated. Nimrod hated God for what he did earlier. Nimrod was a mighty hunter. He would kill the beast in the area, so they made him king. This is, of course, all part of the legend of Nimrod. You won't find this in scripture, but you have to go through other books to kind of get this idea pieced together. Long story short, Nimrod was either killed by some people say he was killed by his grandfather, Noah, and he was killed by his father, I believe, I want to say Lamech, but I could be mistaken. But either way, he was either killed by that or he was killed by a wild boar while he was hunting. Legend says that he was killed by a boar, and basically the reason why we have ham on Christmas, believe it or not, is in part due to that fact. Now, when he was killed, the other way he was killed, his wife Semiramis fell into ill repute because she was a woman that was very promiscuous. She was very promiscuous. And so what happened was she claimed, after she got pregnant, after his death, that she was impregnated. Watch this. Let me show you how the devil works. She was impregnated by Nimrod. She said she had a dream that there was a fire and an evergreen tree came out. The stump was a stump, and it came out and it became a full-grown evergreen tree. And it came out of the fire. And so what they would do, every winter solstice, they would celebrate this time of the year. And they would call it the death and the rebirth. The death and the rebirth. That's what the winter solstice is all about. That's what they always have around December the 18th to around the end of December. But what happened was they would celebrate every year by tossing what they call Yule in the fire. Have I heard that before? Yule logs in the fire. Sound familiar? The word Yule is a word that comes from a Chaldean word, an Aramaic term. A Chaldean word means child or infant. So they would take the children and throw them in the fire. And so now you have the children, which represents the son. You have Nimrod, which represents the father, and you have the mother goddess. So that's how the whole mother goddess, son goddess, and father came about in the ancient world. As people progressed, they left Mesopotamia, they went south into Egypt, and that changed from Semiramis. It changed over to Tammuz, which you'll find in your Bible. And then it went to other cultures, and they called it Moloch in other cultures. Then you go into Egypt, and it changed names to Horus, and Isis, and Osiris, and all these names are the same story, but they're told from various cultures. And then you go into when the Greeks came into Egypt and stole just about everything, including their religion. They called it Adonis. And then the Romans took it and they called it Jupiter. And so all these things, and then they celebrate something called Saturnalia. You hear the word Saturn in that. Saturnalia is Christmas. That's where Christmas came from. So they would celebrate, they would have wreaths on the doors, which is representative of the full circle. And that means from the death and rebirth. When you see that circle, that's what it means. They would sing in the streets, carol. They would kill slaves. They would have orgies all throughout the streets. And then they would fasten trees, like you find in the book of Jeremiah. It talks about that, I think, in Jeremiah chapter 10, roughly. And they would put these balls, which some people say represent the children's heads. So all this is pagan. It has a lot of pagan backdrop to it. Now, we don't celebrate it that same way exactly, but this is this. I'm just trying to give you some background. I went too deep that I didn't really go that far. Anyway, Moloch is where Gehenna was located. It really stands for the Valley of Hinnom. You'll find this in the scripture, the Valley of Hinnom. But it's Gehenna. Gehenna was a place also where the Jews would take their trash and other things and they would throw it into this ravine. And they would keep it burning constantly because they didn't want anything dead to fester, so they would throw it into Gehenna. And so it pictures hellfire. It pictures constant burning. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. I know I went through a little history lesson there, but I want you to see that. So he says, we are in danger of hellfire. Verse 23. So if you are presenting a sacrifice, here's the practical part here. I know we went through a whole lot, but let's look at some practical things. He says, if you're going to present your sacrifice, right? He says, and you bring it to the altar of the temple, and you suddenly remember someone has something against you. Leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled. The Lord says, go and be reconciled prior to coming to worship. That's revolutionary. What do we do oftentimes? We come to worship and we still got anger. Or we come to worship and we haven't reconciled. Reconciliation is the furthest thing on our mind. I'm going to church. I'm going to worship. It's almost as if this man don't count in my eyes. I got a problem with him, but I don't even see you. I'm coming to worship God. And we feel real good about that, don't we? And God is looking at us like a bunch of hypocrites and saying, you're going to hell. That's how deep this lesson really is. I can't, I'm not going to put no perfume on it. I'm not going to put any, I'm not going to polish it. It's what it is. And I haven't heard too many preachers preach like this before. I really haven't heard the sermon preach. And it scares me because I believe anger is something that you can't see, and it becomes passive aggressive. In other words, it's not going to be something that somebody's going to come to you and say, hey man, I hate you. Hate you, Brother Peterson. Make me sick. What we do is, I ain't good to see you. Good to see you, Terry. Hey, so, Am I right about it? Yes, Am I right about it?
You're right.
Amen. And if we take our last, we go say, ooh, I'm ready to go to heaven. That's what we do. The Lord said it shouldn't be that way. Now hear me please. I'm not saying everybody in church has to be your best buddy. I'm not saying you can, if you see him, you gotta throw a party for him. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you got a problem with somebody, you need to talk to them. Yes. And because Satan loves to divide. If he can keep us divided, this church won't grow. This church will not. And no church will grow. But he's got his agents in every church. Every church. But it takes each member of that church not to do this. Preacher can't preach it out of it. Deacons can't legislate it out of it. Elders can't say enough about it. It's just like water on duck's back. Come in Sunday after Sunday. Well, that was a good sermon. Yeah, sure was. Wish somebody else was here to hear it. That's not it, too. That's not it, too. I saw a hand go back. Yes, okay. I wouldn't go here.
You know, that when you say reconcile, you may go to a person in the church, out of the church, in your family, whatever. But if they're not on the same spiritual level and don't receive you, how in the world can you get to them other than praying for them?
Well, you know, that's a great point. I think what the scripture is really trying to show us is You can only do what you can do. That's why there's a difference between reconciling and forgiveness. You can offer forgiveness to somebody that doesn't want to reconcile. One time a preacher said, I heard a story told that a preacher was I guess he was preparing for service, and somebody asked him a question. He answered them, but it was kind of terse. It was something that kind of hurt their feelings, or could be perceived that way. The preacher sat there and thought about it for a minute. He said, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. He went to the guy and said, brother, listen, I'm so sorry I said that to you. I was frustrated, and please forgive me. The man said, I already forgave you. Now, what if the preacher didn't go back to that man and apologize? The man forgave him, but it was incumbent upon the preacher who knew he did wrong to reconcile.
Yes.
Reconciliation can only happen with two people. Forgiveness can only happen with one. You can have forgiveness on both sides, but reconciliation requires two or more. So if a person doesn't want to reconcile with you, that's on them. But you did your part. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Sister Dixon.
Justified in the eyesight of God.
Absolutely.
And it will root out all of that jealousy, envy that brings about the anger.
Absolutely.
Because some people are angry just out of jealousy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You make a great point.
Haven't done anything to them, just
You haven't done
because
anything.
they don't like you.
Just because they don't like you. They don't like you because you're soft-spoken. They don't like you because you're not cliquish. They don't like you because they can't relate to you. Maybe you live on this side of the tracks, they live on that side of the tracks. They don't like you because you don't make enough money. They don't like you because you make too much money. Yeah, they don't like you because you wear glasses. They don't like you because you don't. But it's never ending.
Making the sense.
And to try to reconcile somebody that has that kind of attitude, you'll be going crazy.
Yes, that's right.
You can only do what you can do. That's why God only commands you to. And here's the thing, beautiful point. Here's another thing we don't really catch either. This word love. We love to say love, but we don't understand this.
Agape.
This is what we translate love to mean. Agape has nothing to do. Matter of fact, this is not an adjective. Go research.
It's a verb.
This is a verb. What does that mean?
The action
It
word.
means action. It means something that I don't have to feel to do. To get this, I got to feel a certain way. And our Americanized version, I got to feel this kind of way. Now there are types of love that include feelings. Eros, where we get the word erotic. That's a physical desire. There is a phileo, brotherly love, storge, familiar love. But when it comes to the Bible, the only time you don't see agape is one time, and it's phileo, that brotherly love. Right?
Yes.
Every other instance, agape. You will never see storge. You won't even see eros. You never see that in the Bible. Only thing you'll see is agape and phileo. So that means to us, my love of you does not mean I have to like you. But my love of you wants the best for you. That's why I don't want to see you go to hell, and I definitely don't want to go. But I'm going to do what I can do so that I can keep you from hell and me too.
Amen.
And that means not holding hatred for you. I can let go of hatred and the other person still hate my guts. We're going to talk about it in just a second. Give that to the Lord. Give that to the Lord. Brother Sykes.
Looking at Galatians chapter 6. It's talking about sin in general, but this is verses 7 through 10. It says, do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reap what he sows. Whoever sows to flesh will reap destruction, and whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. And then verse 9 says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up.
That's right.
Verse 10 says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of God.
That's right. Absolutely. Powerful verse. Let me give you some verses to contemplate. Genesis, we said this one in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. Someone give me Genesis 9, 6. Someone else give for me, well, don't go to 9, 6. Give me Genesis 4, 4 through 6. Someone else give for me Ephesians 4, 26, 27. Ephesians 4, 26, 27. Someone else give me Proverbs 19, 19. Proverbs 19, 19. Someone else give me James chapter 1, 19, 20. James 1, 19, 20. And then someone else give me James 4, 1 and 2. All right. Do we have Genesis 4, 4 through 6? What does it say?
Yes.
Good.
Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of his fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry. His countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I appreciate that. Watch what happens here. You know the story. Cain, Abel, both given the same commandment. Bring your first fruits. Cain brings something that was not by faith. That's what Hebrews teaches us. Abel brought something, the first of his flock. Why did the Lord look at one and say, that's a faith, the other one not a faith? Why? Because God says this is what you did through obedience. When one man does it by God's commandment, the other looks at him and says, well, why did you accept his when you didn't accept mine? We both gave sacrifices. The point wasn't the sacrifice. The point was the heart of the sacrifice. And you didn't do it because you didn't do it according to faith. The one that didn't give the right sacrifice got mad with the one that gave the right sacrifice.
Yes.
So much so that the anger built. Now watch this. I thought this was interesting. The Lord says now, I'm going to give you a preview of what's about to happen, Cain. He says, if you do what is right. God gave him a second chance. Watch this. Now, we don't think about this. He didn't give it the first time. God says, now if you bring it the right way, I'll accept it. How many times does God give us a second chance? You messed up the first time, Cain.
Whole lifetime.
But here's what we call, in golf, I think they call it a mulligan. Here's a second chance. If you bring what is right, I'll accept yours too. So it's not about respect of persons. Not like I like Abel more than I like you. I just want you to be right. He says, but here's the scary part. If you don't bring it right, sin is right there at you. Do you realize a lot of us have sin right now at our front door? We don't even know it. God says, I'm not here to condemn you. I want you to do right. But if you don't want to do right, sin is sitting there right there. You pull up in your driveway, he's got the legs crossed, like an Amazon. Wait for you to do it. Hey, what's up, man? You running late tonight? That's sin right there, waiting for you. Let me get that door for you. Come on, man. Come on, we got to be angry. Come on. Walks right there, and you're mad. And God says, look, I told you. Do what I tell you to do, and you can throw it off the devil. If you don't do what I tell you to do, the devil is going to get a foothold in your life. But You see what I'm saying? All right, let's hasten on. I got a long way to go. What's, what I asked for?
Short
Ephesians
time
4,
to get
26, 27. Ephesians 4, 26, 27.
Be angry and do not sin.
Mm-hmm.
Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. No give place to the devil.
Do you see that? He says, don't let sin stay in your heart. And then he says, why? Because when you get anger in you, you're giving, all Satan needs is a reason.
Foothold. Mm-hmm.
That's all he needs. You know, I guarantee you, have you ever had a situation where one thing went bad, you're getting ready to go to work. You're on time. You get to the light. The car in front of you, you can turn right on red. And you just sit there. Oh, come on, man. I was on time, but now I'm right at time. And he takes all day making the right turn after the light turns green. He gets in front of you again. The light is green. He's doing 20 miles an hour. Gets to the edge of the light turns yellow, he stops. By the time you get to work, you're on 20. You are hot under the collar. You're mad. Hey, good to see you. I'm talking right now. I'm tired. What I do? The whole 8-hour shift is shot. Because that one thing that doesn't know you from Adam Howcat was trying to obey the law. You were trying to run the lights. And now you mad the whole day. You come home after a hard day's work. Your spouse sitting there watching TV. Hey, honey, what we gonna have for dinner? Hold on now, 7 o'clock. I've been at work all day. What we have for dinner? What did you cook for dinner? Oh, I thought you were gonna cook. Okay. Oh, no, you didn't. Now it's time. Ding, ding, ding. You know. And it just all we gotta do is get this lunch.
Mm-hmm.
He'll take the rest. He'll take it. All right, look at Proverbs 19. Read this part.
19:14.
Hot-tempered people must pay for penalty. If you rescue them once, you would have to do it again.
Love that Proverbs. Basically, it's saying when a person is angry, you can almost have an angry person try to reconcile with them. But if they have hate in their heart, you got to keep on doing it again and again and again and again. Because it's not you. It's just that they just angry. If you're messing like that, just angry. I don't care what you, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Does the sun ever come up in your life? Is it a monsoon 24/7 where you live? I mean, goodness, I met some people. I met some people like that. Can I say that? In church. Don't tell nobody. That's between us. All right, this is a cathartic lesson, as you can tell. This is very cathartic. All right, he says, leave your sacrifice at the altar, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. God doesn't mind that you sacrifice to him, he just says after. We talked this morning